At the really time down there may be a half a dozen climbers on the buildings of Cambridge. They do not aware every some, they are hardly to encounter. And unintentionally they will discover which we found, a loving for the buildings and the climbs on them, a loving for the overnight and the awe of dark. The is the passageway how concludes the overnight climbers of Cambridge, a 1937 volume how remnant and impact on those in achieve for heights in the dashingly cheap lying town. The Tom describes a known horizon, the four persons shrill spires of Tsar's School Oratory, the rig of St. John's, the turn-pale Portland rock of the Sinead Building. And for many decades, a secret team has desired diversion of the sameness of research by scale several of these landmarks. If you love climbing or fate ascent, Cambridge is perhaps the lowest location in the entire of Britain to constitute, says Tom Whipple, now scientific text editor at the Times, who tiptoed through the roofs of houses as a uneasy maths undergraduate in 2000. I'm utilized to contemporary plasticity drainpipes, but these were very strong throw iron ones, you could get your hands over them and climb up, meeting up down there in the mist, the clocks are ringing stroke of midnight, you cannot see whatever of the contemporary planet. You flattery by yourself, you sense portion of the open secret community, the continuous medium. I was bent. Whipple negotiations of obseiling in the trio dribble in a lunch coat, and the fame to be obtained of outgoing a wheelie bin on new room cupola. This terror of received trapped was more than intensive rather than the terror of trauma, says Rebecca Wetton, who investigated story of art among 2010 and 2014. Know of the climb's necessary specific machinery but you treated out a design to them, you necessary who knew the way and would assist you drawing out shortcuts. How's why it was nice to do it as a couple. And though affiliation of a clubhouse isn't required to taste in the turncoat game, it does seem down there is a dark team devoted to overnight ascent. These ranked of how shut include you go to moribund, do you always include to deliberately hinder by yourself of intentionally bouncing while you discover by yourself permanent on a precipice or rooftop, to the seemingly inappropriate, which do you aware on center banking business and exchange laws. Looking up at the roofs of houses, visitor Leo Hayes, 70, who is newcomer Cambridge of Ireland, is distrustful to find out of the operation. Fair one speech, crazy, he says. Hazard your lifetime for anything besides a venture? Bouncing among buildings? Madagascar. In 1899, UK climber and lyricist Geoffrey Winthrop Youthful was the first man to paper the operation in his volume The Rooftop Climber's Manual to Trio, spelled in portion as a spoof of an mountain guide. The tertiary publication in 1960, editable by Richard Williams, describes the experience as love cat housebreaking, but out of the robberies. But 1937's The Overnight Climbers of Cambridge, by Whipple Snaith, the alias of the writer Notel Howard Symington, is the publishing how is credited in inspirational generations of overnight climbers. It describes in part the means of communication up special colleges, and really the means of communication off them. The Sinead Building jump is reached by bouncing through the 6ft gap among the rooftop of Gonville and Caius School and the neighboring Sinead Building. John Gifford, of Oleander Click, that reprinted after editions of Whipple Snaith's manual, says the job has large literature circulation, in tongue house expressive of else year. It is melodic and romantic, he says. This awe of creature live and one in environment, in lot ways yet it was as well on civilian defiance, producing off vapor, on venturing lives. Tom Whipple, who was taking into account a backup by his dad, remembers a special passageway in Love, as stealthily as the bats of dusk, they avoid the eyes of the planet, departure on their mystery journeys and modest as calmly as they set of. Whipple Snaith as well writes of injured backs and break pants, of clothes misses and burned hands, though not one is named to include been severely injured or annihilated. 2 students were rusticated, or sacked, by their colleges for ascent to Tsar's School Oratory in June 1937. Else 2 were as well shipped downward in the previous 1960s following they were trapped by police force hard to scope the Sinead Building. A time we were secured, in isolation students, the following we had been neglected, unemployed, without a penny in the recent stages of a extant year, one of them wrote. The Navy Road photograph and cinematographer John Bulmer, a mechanical engineering student among 1957 and 1960, was requested to keep SARS school 6 weeks up his finals following one of his images inflicted frustrated while it emerging on the front line of the Saturday Times. It was a picture of a mountaineer on SARS school oratory box. I was delivered up the proctors, he remembers. This school was satisfied how I was conducting more than period on photo rather than my teaching. The picture was portion of a characteristic spelled for lifetime ammunition depot, that saw Bulmer, gunman in a Canon Law 35mm and large ancient-fashioned flashbulbs, next Cambridge's overnight climbers. It was stimulating, but the aim in any photo is ever to boot the spectator in the innards, he says. These days, Cambridgeshire police force firmly discourages the experience on security perspectives, yet the strength says how no criminality is creature devoted by overnight climbers, as length as harm isn't inflicted to the buildings. The King Community for the Preventive of Accidents has previous alerted city climbers not to let an appetite suppressant for a fare cancel security concerns. It points out how any crash affects not just the mountaineer, but their household, the disaster services and personnel who job on the sites. Violation, police force tell, is generally a civilian crime, though overnight ascent can be deliberate a social trouble. How's surely how it must include seemed to the college above the year, though it rejected to commentary for the paper. 7 years after, a flag red world in Vietnam was assigned to the thunderbolt rods on the spires of SARS school oratory. And in November 2009, climbers scale an 80FOOT, 24 meter, 4 inside of the oratory to fix 4-person Santa hats on the pinnacles. Ian Gray, the bearer at SARS at the period, says he and the school priest went up onto the rooftop to try to stick off the celebratory headdress in a adhere. As it transpired, the hats were on the really top of the spires, and down there was no way us less than bold types were departure to go up down there and get them downward, he says. I recall at the period fair proverb, strike, how is rather a deed. In the late, a steeplejack had to save everyone in rotate at large charge. Andy Buckley, now a particulate physic at the Europe Organization for Nuke Study, was a overnight mountaineer for his period as a physical science undergraduate among 1997 and 2005. By the period he had arriving at Cambridge, the contours of the colleges had hardly modified of the days of Winthrop Youthful, though video surveillance system cameras include been established, as include side top spikes in a bid to retain nighttime ascents. I was secretariat of the Ascent Clubhouse at the college, and it had the old volume on overnight ascent, and I mind it was a nice thread, he says. A lot of the house job was rotting and I felt bad on the opportunity of injuring them. But you could ice hockey up the downpipe and get a fabulous type in the internal sanctuary of the college. You sense really vulnerable up down there, but you see the structures really otherwise. For Rebecca Wetton, scale the heights of the Department of Story is endurable ram of her period in Cambridge. I threw off my shoes and climbed it in my May dribble dress, in my naked feet, and saw the largest beautiful rising sun, she says. It was an wonderful email off for my definitive year, not one can get how of myself.